because the only moment that matters in any of those races, the only reason I even enter the race is so that I can get to the place where I want to quit and then figure out a way to not quit. It's not complicated. Like I don't want to be so prepared. If I'm so prepared that I didn't suffer at all, then I just didn't try hard enough. I could have run faster. And, I want to get to that place where I don't think it's possible to keep going and then keep going.
All right, huge welcome to the Ultra Running Guys family, Jeremy Reynolds and Jeff Winchester of the Ultra Running Guys. And man, we are stoked. We have one of the best guests on tonight. This guy is an ultra running legend. You've heard us talk about him on a few other episodes. Just done some incredibly epic stuff, including
machine man,
running Badwater 135 multiple times, and probably best known for running across the Sahara Desert, 4,500 miles. But I'm not going to get into his whole story because there's a lot to talk about there. But I think most importantly, just a good, down-to-earth, neat guy. And so we want you to meet our friend, Charlie Engle. Charlie, how you doing tonight?
I'm great. Thanks for finally having me. I've been begging to get on this show for like years, and you guys have been stonewalling me forever.
We've been busy. We got people knocking the door down.
I had to get through your agent. Like it was just this crazy thing. But thanks. No, I'm glad. I'm super glad to be here. I'm glad we got it together finally. So
our agent, must be Tracy McCullen, because that's actually
which tells you everything you need to know.
It is everything we need to know.
Since he's the backwards guy. Yeah. So,
And so for anybody plugging in, that's really the first time we talked about Charlie. We had Tracy McCullen on one of the episodes. He ran 100 miles backwards. But that's the first chance we got to hang out with Charlie. Charlie, you came out and kind of backed him up, gave him a lot of support. We had a chance to go out there and just hang out with you and get to see that you're just a down-to-earth guy. And we really enjoyed that time together.
Yeah, as I recall, I think he rode a bike the entire time while we were kind of beside Tracy on our feet.
That's pretty accurate. Yeah. Now I had just had surgery. This is true.
This is very true.
But no, it was a good time. And actually, Tracy, I always say Tracy, lots of people, I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but a lot of people invite me to come crew or support them often because they do actually know that the last words out of my mouth that they'll ever hear would be, I think you should quit. So,
true.
Because it is a ultra anything is, it's interesting. You don't want, it sounds strange, but you actually don't want somebody there who has too much compassion for your suffering. Now there's a difference between injury, as we know, and suffering. And, if there's a limb hanging off, then that's one thing. But, if it's just you're out of gas or whatever, I'm definitely the wrong guy to have there. If you actually want to quit, because it won't happen unless there's some real humiliation that goes along with it. So
that's fantastic. I'm going to invite him to your next race.
Well, I was going to say, I 100% believe it. And that's actually, so let's transition in because, I first read your book, and this is the reason I believe it. I first read your book 2016 when it came out, Running Man. For everybody watching, listening, go check out Running Man. Both Jeff and I just listened to it again, the audiobook, which is your voice, which was cool to hear.
Fantastic.
But it really is one of the best books that I've ever read. It's obviously about running, but also just about your incredible background. And so I think what we'd like to do kind of as we kick off is give you a chance just to kind of introduce yourself to the audience. Obviously the long stories in the book, but we'll kind of give you a chance to give us, the shorter version.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. Well, I was lucky to have Simon & Schuster as a publisher, and the book's done really well. What's funny is I got a commission sheet the other day that actually I've sold far more audiobooks actually than I have print copies. And it is just it's the nature of where we are these days. People like to listen to stuff when they're running or working out or whatever. And I would say, the book isn't, as you said, it is it is a book about running, but it's also not about running at all. And I didn't want to crank out another book that says, I went to this race and here's what happened. And this is a lesson I learned. And then I went to this race and here's what because there's a lot of better runners than me who can tell those kinds of stories, who actually race more prolifically than I do. I'm not about seeing how many races I can do. I do look for experiences. And so on that note, I was born in North Carolina in Albemarle, just outside of Charlotte. And my parents were, super young, 18, 19. My dad was actually playing basketball for Dean Smith at Carolina when I was born.
Very cool.
Until he got kicked off the team for drinking. I don't think he's the only one that ever happened to, but this was, early on. And so I come by some of my traits pretty honestly. My mom was a perpetual theater student, so I was the only child, and I grew up in this very adult world. I like to say that I was lovingly neglected, and my mother was a kid, and my parents divorced, and I just kind of grew up taking care of myself, and not like in some, oh my God, I'm in terrible shape, but just sort of a little hippie, scrawny, long-haired, dirty kid doing his thing out in the woods in Durham, playing Army and running around in my underwear, and that was just last week.
I was saying that was recent. I think that was a recent story, right?
But flash forward, and I finally figured out that I could get a little more attention from doing some more positive things. So I did end up ultimately applying myself in school, and after a few years of some bad grades, and ended up in high school, moving in with my father, and it switched things full 180 degrees from no structure to far too much structure, which I rebelled against. And I ended up going to UNC Chapel Hill, having been, top 10 in my class and the captain of a few teams and dated a few cheerleaders and student body president, and, did some overachieving things, ostensibly to get attention from my dad. And of course that didn't work. But I went to Carolina, totally made a mess of that. Ended up, the drinking age was still 18, and I turned 18. It was like the first month of college. And I figured out pretty quickly that I was actually pretty average. All my accolades in high school, damn if there weren't 4,000 other freshmen at Carolina that all had, good grades and had been in student government, and they actually knew how to study and do other things. And it took me the first year to figure out that backgammon wasn't actually just a drinking game, because that's how I conducted myself. So flash forward, I ended up in my junior year not going to class for an entire semester. Cocaine really entered my life in a serious way at that point. I left school, and I really spent the next 10 years in this never-ending cycle of move somewhere, get a job selling cars, fitness memberships, whatever, and be the top salesman. I mean, I'm not bragging, but it's almost the insecurity in me that made me push so hard to need to be that guy. So I'd be the top salesman in the company, or with Toyota in the whole country for a couple of years. Then I'd just totally screw it all up, have to move somewhere else, start all over again. And that pattern just really, I think it was inevitable every single time, because of course, as the old saying goes, no matter where you go, there you are. Mm-hmm. And I left everything behind except for me each and every time. And it took me many years, it took me 10 years to figure out the commonality of those situations. And so when I was 29, my first son, Brett, was born. And, and I thought finally, he's going to save me. Like this little baby is actually going to stop me from drinking and doing drugs, because, surely I could be sober for him. And that lasted for a couple months. And, you know, inexplicably, I found myself driving to, you know, the worst neighborhood in town. I was working out in Kansas and Wichita, and that 6 day crack smoking, drinking binge ended in me sitting on the ground, handcuffed and bullet holes in my car while the police searched through it. And I think the the recognition in that moment of something so incredibly important, which was, you know, despite being up for 6 days with no sleep, probably no food, you know, drinking alcohol and just like doing drugs, and like that's all I was doing. But I had the clearest thought I've ever had. Like, nobody's coming to save you. My son certainly can't save me. My boss couldn't save me. My wife couldn't. My job, you know, none of that stuff was ever going to stop me from doing anything, because that's not the way it works. And I needed to save myself. And I realized in that moment I had a decision to make. And the decision was between living and dying. And I chose running. And, you know, some people might consider that dying, but, you know, I had used running throughout my years of addiction and in Chapel Hill even, and all that, to almost a combination of punishment, like, you know, punishing myself when I screwed up, and also recognizing that because I was a binger, man, I'd go on a month-long tear, and then I'm like, I'm never doing that again. I'm done. I quit, you know, and I meant it. Every addict in the world understands that when a person says that, it's really not, like, it's not a lie. It almost always turns out to be a lie, but that's not until later. It's in that moment, it's heartfelt, because that's the source of the misery and the pain. And, like, you know, who wants to live, who would choose to live like that? Like, you wouldn't choose that kind of pain and suffering. And but it took a long time, and this time was just, you know, it was different. Somehow I didn't end up in jail that night, and I went to an AA meeting instead. And the next morning I got up and put on my running shoes and went for a run. And I did those things every day for the next 3 years, you know. And slowly I figured out that, you know, running wasn't an affliction. It wasn't a curse. It was actually my superpower. Like, our addiction, I'm sorry, addiction wasn't a curse. Addiction was my superpower. It was the thing that made me good at stuff. If I didn't have that addictive personality, that obsessive nature, then, you know, I probably wouldn't have been an addict, but I also wouldn't have been good at anything else. And so, because I was a really good addict.
Well, if you don't mind, I do have a quick question, because you just alluded to it and you said, just for some reason, and I don't think that it quite came across in the book, but obviously this is the shortened version. But I told Jeff, reading the book was like reading like Pulp Fiction. You know, I felt like there were scenes out of Pulp Fiction in there. And so the bullet holes was one thing, but you had already been through just some incredible, you know, I mean, guys were coming to hurt you. If I remember right,
with baseball bats.
With baseball bats, you had a car stolen, and you found it. And then after you drove off, there was a baby in the. I mean,
there's a lot of stories in the book.
There was a lot of stories.
Amazing that you went through.
Yeah, it's incredible. And so one of the questions that I had was, and I know it was shortly after your son, but does something stand out about that one night, or something that made you say, or that it stuck, versus all the other times you said, this is it?
Yeah, like what flipped the switch?
Yeah, God, it's such a great question, because I mean, I certainly asked myself, and I'm happy to say that by writing the book and by actually choosing to be really public about my struggles and my journey, I get a lot of inquiries from people who are really asking that same thing, because they're watching a loved one die on a daily basis, or maybe it's they themselves, and they do desperately want to quit. And look, I always tell people, if they're interested in the book, I remind people that, like, I'm sober by page like 65 or 70. It's like I don't spend an entire, it's not a drunkalogue, you know, I like to give my qualifications for the first part of the book so that people understand this is where I came from, but I don't It's not one of those books that stays in that space for the entire time, because I want people who read it, whether they're an addict or not, to find hope in the story. Even though I don't, it's not like When I Quit also that like magically everything became wonderful in life, because that also doesn't happen. But for some reason, I really believe it was this simple. I had been waiting for 29 years for someone else to come save me. And I had such deep emotions, like for the first time ever holding this little baby in my hands, I felt love for him and from him that I certainly didn't think I was capable of. And as an addict, I didn't think I was deserving of. Like, who could possibly love me? And he gave me hope. That situation gave me hope. And when that hope was like completely thrown to the ground and smashed, because like that was my last hope as far as I was concerned. So when I say, I'm not being melodramatic or whatever, when I say in that moment, I felt like I had a choice between living and dying. The bad news is I wasn't going to die like tonight. I wasn't going to die probably the next day, but I was going to continue dying every day, and eventually probably would like literally die. And I was lucky enough in that moment to recognize the depth of my despair at that time. And I think I think that's what it took for me, because most of my other binges and the crazy stuff that you read in the book and just some of the outlandish things and positions that I put myself in, they basically were all the same. Like they were dressed up differently and whatever, and just like comparing one addict story to others, they may look completely different. This guy might be wearing a suit and tie and this one's homeless in the gutter. The journey is still very, very similar when you get down to the heart of addiction. And for whatever reason, that night, sitting on that ground, there was no like burning bush or anything anywhere. And although my car may have been on fire, I'm not sure, but for whatever reason, that night when I said, and you guys know, we've talked about it some, I'm not a religious person, all right? Doesn't mean I'm not spiritual, doesn't mean I don't have beliefs. I certainly respect other people's ways of both worshiping and recovering. But that night, I very, very clearly said a prayer for the first time ever that I actually like meant. Because all my prayers before that night were Santa Claus prayers, I like to call them. Oh, if you just get me out of this, I promise I'll never do that again. Right? Because they were all to like save my butt in some situation. And on this night, it really wasn't about saving me. All I wanted was to have the burden lifted. I just didn't want to feel that unbelievable pull and urge to use drugs. I just asked for that urge to go away, as simple as that sounds. And I did feel like it felt like an honest ask, because everything else always had strings attached. Every other ask I ever had made was all about being embarrassed or ashamed, or I screwed up again, or I was getting ready to lose this job or that girl or whatever it might be. And this one was just different. And a lot of people get to that point and they still aren't lucky enough to find that place inside them that takes them to the place where it's just over and done with for them. So I wish I could identify it even more, because then I would, and I'm sorry, I know I'm eating up time here, but I will also say, service is really the key. And you guys actually know that, because what you do is serve also. Service in life is actually the key. And so it was one of those times where I finally wasn't just thinking about me, and maybe it was in service to my son. I was trying to get him to save me. And, Meanwhile, it should have been the other way around, because he didn't even know he was in danger yet.
Right.
having me as a father.
Well, I mean, obviously it was a huge blessing that that moment happened.
Yeah.
One of the things I appreciate about just everything, Charlie, is everything you just shared and everything in the book, just your authenticity and just being transparent. But like you said, it's not the entire book. It's not your entire story. And again, I encourage everybody who's listening to check out the book. You go into the book about some of how you got into doing ultras in the first place. I think you were in Australia, thought you'd sign up for like a 5K and ended up doing a 50K. I mean,
which is one of my favorite stories.
It is one of my favorite stories ever. I mean, it's impressive, like you ran Badwater and all that stuff, but to me, that 50K that you thought was a 5K is probably my favorite Charlie Engle story, because I mean, I'm an idiot and I do stuff like that.
Hey, nobody ever said I was smart.
You kind of did at the beginning. You said you were smart. I mean, then
oh, that's true.
You did. But yes, apparently it didn't translate as you became older.
Okay, maybe not wise. Maybe I'm wise but not smart. I don't know.
There you go. But it was cool. So you have a resume of races and a resume of endurance experiences that you've been involved in. When you look back at your life, and it may not even be just endurance stuff or even your athletic performances, is there any moment or any accomplishment that you have that just stands out above them all?
So what's interesting is the linchpin, there's absolutely no doubt about it. The pivot point in my life is the Sahara Desert run. And that's for a lot of reasons, because there's kind of like pre-Sahara, which was this journey into sobriety, this also understanding, and again, not to get too deep on this again, but it's not like I suddenly magically had it all figured out. Like when I got sober, that's really not how it works. For people who've been through it, they understand that. And I ran in some ways, like I sort of said a moment ago, even to continue to like punish myself in a way, because I just, I felt like I was undeserving of all the good things that were sort of coming my way. But the path led me to finally combine my passion of running and travel and adventure with attempting to make a living at it. And the words like wealthy ultra runner, you don't hear those words together very often, because I only know of maybe one or two who have, struck the magic rainbow and come away with, a pot of gold, because that's not why you do it. But the moment that stands out to me, and I'm just going to tell you the one that sticks in my head. So halfway through the Sahara, there was this town, and it's in the film Running the Sahara, where we come into this town, this little oasis village called Fashi. And there was and some version of this, though, happened to me many times across the Sahara. But we'd come into the town, nobody's got a cell phone. Like, nobody knows we're coming in advance. It isn't like, hey, here comes the white guys running into your town or whatever. Like, we're just there. Kids come out. They're barefooted and snot-nosed, and like, they're just kids. Like, they're just kids, same as you'd find anywhere. But they come out and they run with us, and there's this one little boy in that town. There were hundreds of children running with us in this village. The village is also interesting because it's a combination of, most of the villages we ran through were either kind of Arab descent or Black African. And it wasn't so much segregation, it's just the nature of the world. One was one. This was a hundreds of years old oasis village that basically did salt mining more than anything else. And like, it was a true melting pot of all the cultures, and it was beautiful, and you could see it, with the kids and with the adults. But this little boy came up and he grabbed my hand, like, just as we're coming into the village, and he didn't let go of it for about 30 minutes. Like, he was just glued to me, and he was determined that he was going to keep that position and hold on. And there was no, he spoke Arabic, which I don't, and he didn't speak any English. So there was never any like that kind of actual like communication, other than just like smiles and joy. And so the point of that is, I think most people would think that I'd pick a story from Badwater that has me finishing in the top 5, or, it's getting to the finish of running the Sahara, 4,500 miles, and being done. Being done is never exciting. Being done is a relief. And I recognize that in me still today. And that's still the addict speaking, because getting through something is sort of justification for living. Like, okay, yeah, I am, because I still struggle. I still, after 28 years clean and sober, I still need the validation that comes from things external from me. And part of my lifelong goal is to continue to be more open with whatever gifts I have, but to feel okay about myself regardless of what I'm accomplishing. So that was a really long answer and a way of saying that I'm more cultural explorer than I am runner. And like, I'm way more interested in the people I encounter in this country or any other country, you guys included. You know, if we had gotten together just at a coffee shop when we first met, that would have been fine. It would have been fine. I love coffee. So it would have been great. And I would have gotten you to buy, and it would have been awesome. But I would have had 2 like oat milk lattes, you know,
Right.
dairy free,
Couple for the road.
you know, and right. And, you know, but it's different when you meet people and there's this shared physicality, and you're running or you're biking or you're just sharing the excitement of whatever the situation is. So, you know, I have many, many, many favorite moments, and almost none of them have anything to do with the running part.
It's a connection of people. That was cool. I really appreciate you.
And in particular, when you don't speak the language, right? Because I mean, there's no like, you know, I always say to people too, if you want a different experience and you're traveling outside the country, get out of your freaking car and walk into a village. Like, even if you just do it for the last half mile and you sort of fake it, like if it's a real remote village, like I'm talking Africa, South America, you know, not Vienna, but get out and go into a village in the same way that where all the other people live, that's how they live. They're not driving around in cars, you know, they're on foot. You know, so get out of your car, walk in, and see how they treat you differently and how you're welcomed differently. Because when you drive in that SUV, that Range Rover or whatever, even if it's an old beat to crap one, you're still that guy getting out of the car.
Right.
And that causes people to come at you with their hand out or whatever experience that a lot of Americans feel like they have when they go to less fortunate, you know, places. I shouldn't even say less fortunate. Like, well, my wife would kick me for that.
Well, it's interesting though, because one of the stories in the book, and I know we're going to talk about like some stuff you got going on now, so I won't go too far down this path, but you actually have another story in the book where another child got your attention that was waiting on his parents. They were going out to get water, and he was sitting in the desert, and it struck you from an emotional standpoint. And to me, what I loved about that story is, other than the fact it was kind of heartbreaking, right? But I love the fact that, you know, y'all are in the middle of this big thing that can be all self-focused, only on what y'all are doing and everything, but yet you take the time to kind of see people outside of yourselves and what their lives look like. And to me, that just expressed like the humanness of who you are, and even, you know, for the guys you're running with too. And so that's what I liked about the book. Like you said, it's a full story of life, not just addictions. It's everything it's touched on. So it's a really, really good book.
Look, that was a crazy story. I'll tell you one very brief thing. That kid, he was way more terrified of us than he was of being in the desert by himself. Like, that had been his life up to that point. He didn't know any different. He only knew that kind of hardship. And now all of a sudden at dusk on some random day when his parents are 3 days away getting water, you know, a big giant group of people comes kind of fumbling through his camp. And he was, you know, he was mostly just afraid of us, but the circumstance that caused him to be out there in the desert by himself was really, it wasn't hard. I try not to be heartbroken about it, because it's more like you can be heartbroken about stuff, or you can choose to try to do something about it. And, you know, and I think we made an effort. Doesn't mean I got to help that kid, right? but because we ended up creating this great clean water nonprofit that still is going today. It's the world's largest clean water nonprofit, which came out of that project, water.org. And yet, you know, a lot of the people that I encountered who needed help probably didn't make it. Like it took years before the real works got going, but that's the way life is. You still can, I always say with the Sahara, and it's such a great metaphor for life, you can only run the miles that are right in front of you. You can't run tomorrow's miles or next week's miles or next month's, you know. If you run the ones that you're in right now and that you're staring at and that are calling your name, then the other miles will come and they'll take care of themselves. But if you get caught up in, it is a one day at a time mantra, right? So,
for sure. Well, there's a couple of things that I take away. One is that when we first met, if I just would have held your hand for 30 minutes and not said anything, maybe I would have got a lot further than just making small talk.
If you're giving me coffee,
yeah.
It's a lot you would have had to do.
I know.
It's coffee and holding hands. A real date.
But I do want to tell for everybody listening, we'll put it in the notes. But there, you referenced, there is the movie Running the Sahara. You also, you know, I think my favorite version is the way you write about it in the book, because you know, it is a movie, and I think there was some kind of, you know, manufactured drama in there, but it's still really cool to be able to watch it, to see you guys do that thing. And when I watched it and I heard it in the book, and you mentioned it, is it Fauci? How did you pronounce it? Fauci?
Yeah, Fauci, actually.
Fauci. The section right before that, you guys were, I mean, it sounded like you guys, and I don't know if it was Ray specifically, but there was some kind of despair going on. It was a really, really tough spot. That was like, it seemed like it was just a gift given to you guys right when you needed it, which was a cool thing to see, especially in the movie.
Well, sometimes people can't take gifts, right? I mean, they get so determined that and this is what I tell people all the time. My own kids is where it really started. Never quit when you're at a low moment. And that sounds kind of silly because of course that's the time you're going to quit, is when you're at a low moment. But that's the worst time to quit. You know, I always say to people, not jokingly, you can always quit later.
Right.
But that low moment is not real. It is going to pass. Like it is. But when you're in it, and I'm talking about if you're thinking about relapsing, or you're thinking about quitting the race, or you're leaving the relationship, or you're quitting the job, like all those things tend to have, the real thought to do that is in some terrible moment. And we as human beings think that moment is going to last forever. They're like in a marathon, if it feels awful at 17 miles, like only thing you can think about is I have 9 more miles and it's going to feel just this bad or worse, right? And whereas in fact, experience tells you, if you're paying attention, if I eat a couple of gels, if I drink some water, if I slow down and maybe walk for 5 minutes and keep it moving forward, you might go from a 10 pain level down to an 8. But it feels like the weight of the world is off of you, and suddenly you can actually see moving forward. You may decide at the end of the race, I'm never doing that again. Actually, most of us do say that at the end of a race, you know, and then 2 days later we sign up for the next one. And that's why I just always say, you know, high places and low places are not real. They seem like they're like, don't buy the brand new $100,000 car on the day that you got the raise. Let the raise settle in for a few days, because you don't know what's going to happen. You might hate the new job. You might like whatever, and don't quit the relationship just because you got into an argument. Again, you may still decide to do it, but we make big decisions at low moments. And my teammates were definitely having that. Well, it is my mantra. Like I say it to myself. I get a little, I mean, you know, my wife has some health problems this last year, like everybody else has been tough, but we've sort of been in the COVID year for about 4 years now in my household. So we have some low moments in our lives, and we are great about reminding each other, don't catastrophize too much in this situation. Go take a nap, lay down, even just get yourself mired in a serious funk today. That's okay. Like turn on a Netflix show, eat some junk food. I mean, sure, the best thing for me to do is to go out for a run and be happy. You know what? That's not the way life works all the time. But it's learning how to deal with the times when you can't control all of that. I think that makes for an overall happier life. And it, it settles expectations in a way that, there's nobody's perfect. Nobody's happy all the freaking time.
Mhm.
And if they are, I don't believe it.
Yeah, I tell my kids that both low moments and high moments have the same thing in common. They're both temporary.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We're going to stay right in this, like,
Mhm.
hey, look at that. We're going to stay right in this safe middle ground most of the time. That's boring as hell. I mean, the weird thing is it's the high moments and the low moments that are the ones we remember. I ask people all the time, tell me about the race, like whatever they just did, marathon, 100-miler, I don't care what it is. Tell me about the race. I don't say, tell me about what was hard about the race or tell me about, whatever. And it may take a second, but they always get to the moment. And you know what I'm talking about, because the only moment that matters in any of those races, the only reason I even enter the race is so that I can get to the place where I want to quit and then figure out a way to not quit. It's not complicated. Like I don't want to be so prepared. If I'm so prepared that I didn't suffer at all, then I just didn't try hard enough. I could have run faster. And, I want to get to that place where I don't think it's possible to keep going and then keep going.
Well, so speaking of being prepared, we're going to switch gears just a little bit here. Tell us about this race you've got coming up in, I think, 3 weeks.
Yeah. So seemed like a good idea at the time. So it is crazy. So I sort of, a friend of mine is putting on, and it's funny, he's open about it. So I don't mind. I have permission to say it. So he's someone who's in recovery, and we met doing an event a few years ago, and like he's
well, and don't forget,
hang on a minute.
Yeah, so he was just our most recent guest.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So John Fry, so he spoke openly.
Yeah. I'm old. You have to connect the dots for me. So yeah, so John is when we first met, we were in this it was a 24-hour event. It was totally casual. A friend of mine putting it on, whatever. And it was a fun event. And John was such a nice guy and like just trying to figure it out. He's a big guy too. You guys met him.
Yeah.
Or did you meet him in person, or was this okay? He's big. You may not be able to tell, but he's he's a few inches taller than me and probably 30 pounds heavier. So he's a bigger guy. And so, but John, we had a great time that night, and we stayed in touch. And then I do my birthday celebration, my sober celebration at a treatment center in Raleigh every year. And John came out and supported me. He does his race at the Oakwood Cemetery in Raleigh every December. He's raised a ton of money for Healing Transitions, which is our sort of favorite homeless shelter treatment center, all around life-saving place. But John, last year, he sort of said, hey, I'm thinking about putting on this 100-miler, mountain to sea trail, 100-miler. I've got this stretch of the mountain to sea trail, and for 50, it's just an out and back. For 100, it's a double out and back. And what's funny is a few weeks ago, I still feel this heel injury a little bit. When you guys met me, I had that going on. And I'd say it's 95% though. So I'm feeling confident. So what does confidence breed? Overtraining. And so like anybody else, I'd gone 6 months without really running. And then in January, starting January 1, I started doing the virtual Badwater. And so it doesn't sound like a lot, but I ran like 75 miles a week for 4 straight weeks in January. And I'm talking slow ass miles though. We're talking in general, 10, 11, 12, 15-minute miles sometimes. Like I wasn't in any hurry. I was just out there doing my thing. And I felt pretty good. But anyway, I now have developed this crazy injury. It's either like in my psoas or my piriformis. And so like I haven't run for 10 days now. I haven't told John yet, so you guys don't bust me. But I mean, my full intention though is, I committed that I would be there to do the race. And This is a good insight. I think it's not that I'm the most humble guy in the world. I'm not claiming that, but like I used to know guys all the time that if they were training for a run and they were going to enter a training race, they would enter under a different name because they were so egotistical that they didn't want like a slow time under their name. And like, so you know what? I signed up for the run. So if I can do it, and I've run 100 milers in 16, 17 hours. If I go out there and it takes me 30 hours and I have to walk the damn thing, so what? Like some people might look at my ultra sign up, later on and say, "Oh, God, that guy's really slowing down." Do I really care? I mean, and actually, I'm actually asking myself a real question because I can't say to you that no, I don't care 100%. Like because I think it's disingenuous.
Right.
I still, that ego part of me still is, I mean, it's there. And so I always have to like, figure out what I'm going to do with it.
Well, I'm okay with that because if you're going to continue to be at the back of the pack, you'll be back there with me.
we can have a good chat. Just
right.
Oat milk latte. Just remember, oat milk latte.
Well, it goes right into what you were just talking about, how, you want to run the race to get to the point where you feel like you want to quit. And when you were getting ready to sign up for that, you and I were chatting about setting this up and you said, "Hey, look, between me and you, I don't know that I'm ready, but sometimes that's part of the fun. That's why you do it is it's not always a physical. Sometimes it's mental."
Well, ultra running is all, I mean, honestly, it really is all mental. Now, if you're trying to win a race,
right?
Like if you're really trying to go fast and max out, that takes a certain type of preparation and whatever else. But like I do. It's not just like lip service to say that anybody can do this. That old rule. I mean, if you can run a marathon, you can run 100 miles.
Which John
It's just a matter
because he had only run a marathon when you guys went out and did that 24-hour event.
Hell, I know lots of 100 milers who've never run a marathon. Like that's the other interesting trend in the last 10 years or so. There's a lot of young guys and girls entering the sport they have no interest in like mass 10,000 or 20,000 person races. That's not what they want. They want what we all love, which is nature and space and having a challenge where, frankly, other than the start line, you're almost entirely alone the whole time, and so it is, there's a particular thing about that I think is, and if you're doing it just to check a box or get a medal, I don't know, it's maybe doing it once and whatever, but that's a hollow thing. It is the searching. I envision it like this. There is an entire team of like carpenters in my insides when I run those long distances that is like they're taking scrapers and they're getting the barnacles off the wall and they're shining it up. And it's all like, by the time I'm crossing the finish line, hopefully, like that thing is empty. It's basically just an empty shell. And then I get to fill it with other crap that I'll have to get rid of again later. But, at least it's new stuff. And it is that is how I feel. It's like, I want to unburden myself. And I don't know any way. I love meditation. I do breath work. I like all kinds of other holistic things, but I know of no other way that for me that I can get to the heart of the matter and kind of get a fresh start than going out there and running a really long way or hiking.
I feel exactly the same. And I do want to transition here in a minute, but speaking of running a really long way, so you got the mountains to the sea 100, which is what we've been talking about, but then you also pulled the trigger on the Cocodona 250 in May, which I'm super jealous of. And one of our previous guests, also Andy Glaze, who's just an incredible runner, he'll be out there as well. So we talked to him about that event. But it looks amazing. But how do you feel about that? 250 miles over 5 days is how you can spread it out if you want. So you excited about that one?
I am. I mean, I'm looking at the calendar right now going, oh my God, what? I mean, even I'm going, what was I thinking? Because, but it is, okay, years ago, I remember speaking at the Boston Marathon even, and I always have people before a race raise their hands at like the pasta dinner and like say how many marathons they've run. You know, I got to that guy that had run like 140 or whatever, and it's like, you know, so are you, you know, I wasn't trying to give him a hard time either, but you know, I'm like, are you nervous at all about tomorrow? Like, you know, and he's like, no, you know, I'm not worried. And I'm like, and I actually said, that wasn't the intent wasn't to give him a hard time, but I ended up saying, you know, don't you miss that? And
Yeah.
so the point is like, there is nothing like stepping up to the start of something and having absolutely no idea if you can do it and being scared. It's like, there's nothing like a first. And in any situation in life. And in fact, it's one of the things I always say, you know, we spend our lives chasing firsts, you know, whether it's, you know, drugs, girls, cars, jobs, races, whatever it is, you know, we try to recreate the circumstances for that first experience. And you really can't. Like, I could have turned around and run back across the Sahara the other direction, and it wouldn't have been the same. I mean, it sounds strange, but it just wouldn't have been the same thing.
Yeah, I love it. So other than the Cocodona and obviously the one you've got coming up in 3 weeks, the Mounts to the Sea 100, you mentioned right before we got started, you have another one that you're looking at doing as well.
I have indeed signed up for Badwater. Yeah. So, you know, it's been in, you know, everybody knows it's in the running world anyway. And I mean, you don't have to be in the running world to know this. It's in question as to whether the event would happen. It didn't happen last year. And because Badwater 135, which is 135 miles through Death Valley in July, is deeply dependent upon relationships with the park services and the state of California and federal land. You know, it goes through all kinds of different parts. So you've got to get permits like crazy. And all it takes is one of those governing bodies to say no to not allow the race to actually happen. And so, you know, it's been a weird, it's been a weird time to actually think about, but I love the event. I love the, you know, I sort of outkick the coverage when I go to Badwater. I do better in that race than I do in proportion to my actual talent level. And, you know, I mean, I've won a lot of races in my career, but Badwater is a really hard race. And there's a lot of, like the top 20 there, usually, if you look at their race resumes, you know, I would be down near the bottom of that, if at all. Yet somehow I've managed to be, you know, top 5 there like 5 or 6 times. And it's just, for whatever reason, I love that race. I love the heat. Part of it's, I could thank North Carolina, you know. I love the heat, you know, and I know how to run in the heat. I tell stories, my early Badwaters, I'd go out to, in Greensboro where I lived, I'd go out to the park, Country Park it was called, and I would put on 3 or 4 layers of like long sleeves, and this is June, and I'd put on knit caps and sweatpants and gloves, and like people would call the park service on me and like say, there's a guy who's crazy, we think he's armed, and like, you know, I mean,
they're like, oh, there's Charlie again, he's out there.
And I'm not kidding, the park service would drive up next to me and the guy would not even roll down his window and he'd just shake his head and keep driving. That's when I knew I had made it.
That's so awesome.
That is cool.
Well, hey, let's talk about, because I know we're getting short on time. We know that you've got some other things going on as well, things that you're very passionate about that tie into your past, as well as, you know, just the things that you've been doing. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about kind of the projects or, you know, ideas that you're working on.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I'll tell you, it really all ties back to addiction and recovery. And for years, you know, writing the book, being open about my recovery, whenever I speak on a stage, you know, I mean, we don't even have time for it today, but you guys know that when I get on a stage or I'm speaking to a group, I don't care if it's Google, Oracle, some drug company, or Mrs. Johnson's 3rd grade class. I talk about drugs and alcohol, you know, addiction and recovery, running and adventure, spending time in prison, the struggles of everyday life still, because nobody's story is struggle free. And so I've always wanted to find a way to not just share the struggle. It's funny too. I've always felt like, not that I wasn't worthy of giving advice, but there's a different mechanism when you say that you're a coach, or that when you're making it part of your vocation to try to like help other people. It's a weird line to cross, and it's one I've always been a little uncomfortable with, but I actually feel like the time is coming for me where it's actually okay. Some of it's guilt too, because in sobriety, you sort of think it's always about giving back to the program and to people and to whatever, and it is, but that doesn't mean that you're not allowed to make, a living at it if that's appropriate. And so, I mean, people who work in treatment centers, or if you're an addiction therapist, I mean, there's all kinds of vocations out there who make livings in the industry. And so I'm working on something that will allow me to help a lot of people, and it really involves technology. So there's a company I'm working with called Whoop that a lot of people are familiar with, and so I've been wearing one, for a while now, and I'm involved in some studies, and the studies will actually be very high end, very involving some big universities. And, look, I think that I can help improve outcomes, because that's ultimately the thing. I mean, the addiction industry, there's 14,000 treatment centers out there. And unfortunately, by all accounts, only about 5 to 10% of people who go through a treatment center manage to stay sober for a year or more after they leave. And that's a pretty low bar in my view. And I think a lot of that has to do with accountability. And I think people, when they leave a treatment center, most of them do genuinely want the way they feel in that moment to continue, but then life happens. Right. And all the other pressures, and they maybe have to go back to the same neighborhood where they struggled, or the same relationship, or whatever it is. And so this thing that I'm doing and going to be doing, it's going to take a little while to develop, and some of it's still working here, but it's trying to figure out, how to go deep into the addiction recovery space and use technology as an accountability coach, in a sense. And I'll put it to you this way, and then I'll come back on and we'll do this again another time once we get closer to launch. But here's the thing. I have a coach. I've always had a coach, but do I actually need a coach to tell me how many miles to run to get ready for a race? Not really. It's not that I couldn't benefit from that, but that's not a necessity in my life. What I need is a coach to hold me accountable for my approach, for my attitude, for my sleeping, for my eating, for my hydrating, I do still need, despite my discipline that I do actually have and all the knowledge I've had over the years, it helps in any circumstance for one human being to ask another one, how was your workout today? How was your run today? Are you hydrating? You've been sleeping well lately. You've been whatever. And those are not, as long as it's a friendly relationship and that person is basically charged with trying to help. Those are powerful questions, because I'll use hydration as the simplest thing. Almost all of us who know it, we know it's practically the most important thing there is. Yet I go through almost every day chronically dehydrated, because there is not enough. I'm not actually going to set an alarm every 15 minutes on my watch. I mean, I think that I'm smart enough to do it, yet I do need a system to help me do things. So what I'm working on, there's another dream going on. I actually have a long-term dream to actually open a sober living space that would house more than 100 people, and would be because I'll finish it this way, and I talked to you guys a little bit about it. You know, talk therapy has been the main form of therapy in the addiction treatment space pretty much since its inception. And it is my belief, and certainly what worked for me personally, that a more physical approach to getting sober in the early days, and it's not to say that you don't also do talk therapy, but there needs to be an approach that focuses just on getting the body healthy. Because I like to say, you know, if you don't feel good, you can't get well. And I mean, it's really that simple. Like if you still feel like crap sitting in a plastic chair talking to a therapist about your childhood problems that might have led to some sort of other thing, I'm not saying that's not useful, but I know you two believe this thing too. You know, you think I talk a lot now. You guys ran with me and me with you. Like when you're running, when you're moving, your mind is clear. It's focused, the ideas come, the passion is there, like every idea. It's only when I get back to the house that I can't figure out what the hell to do about all my great ideas. You know, but it just shows there's such great power in that. So I want to create actually a sober living space where when there's therapy sessions, we should do a 20-minute or 30-minute walk or jog before the therapy, and like then come in like I'm opened up, you know, my body, my mind, my chest is like, I'm open. Now you want to ask me questions about my life and about like, we want to have a real deep conversation. That's the time to have it. Not after I've just had a stressful day and I'm trying to leave work and I got to deal with this and I'm showing up, you know, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to sit on a couch and talk to somebody. I've done that 1,000 times and it's helped me in many, many ways. So I'm not downing it. I'm just saying there are better ways, in my opinion, for people to find their way into not just through addiction, but through this mental wellness crisis that we've got going on right now. And it will continue for many years to come, thanks to COVID and the other stressors that we have going on. You know, people need to understand how to take care of themselves better. And so that is a super focused mission of mine in this next phase of my life.
And I think it's fascinating. I do have a question, and then we'll probably go ahead and wrap it up to respect your time. But have you ever heard of Run Talk Run?
Yeah.
Okay. So because one of our guests, Derek, who's over in England, which I think is kind of where it started. You know, he talked about his struggles with anxiety and some different things and depression, but Run Talk Run is very similar. And so if you can take that concept and marry it with technology, like you're talking about,
it's huge.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And, you know, Wilmington's a huge running community. And I think it's also, you know, half the guys that I run with have been sober for 10 plus years.
So
we're going to be a satellite office for you.
That's exactly what I was going to say is if there's ever anything that we can do to help out or
there will be
plug something into this area. What is the best way? I know you said we can follow up afterwards, but obviously we'll post your stuff. You're active on social media. You've got your website. Are those the best ways for people to plug in and follow what you're doing?
Yes. Perfect. If you just go to charlieengle.com, all my social media is there. Like it's the best way to find every link. You guys will see, and I realize this, you know, we're not in real time right here, but just today I posted, a video just even before I came on with you guys that you'll find interesting. It's just 2.5 minutes. It's a really well done. I don't mind shouting out one of my sponsors is Orgain. And Orgain's, you know, I'm a plant-based guy. We didn't even talk about any of that because I ran my mouth too much. But, you know, that's another big part of my life as far as taking care of myself and my overall health. You know, it works for me. But they gave me a chance to really tell the story of kind of addiction and recovery and why I do spend so much time sort of obsessing over how to treat my body. As I always say, there's only, you know, as we all know, we're only born with one thing that we actually own. There's only one thing that's ever all ours and nobody else's till the day we die. And that's the body that we inhabit. Everything else comes and goes and you can acquire all the stuff you want. and it just doesn't matter. It's meaningless if, if the body's not working, none of that other stuff matters. And so it's it's a constant mission to be reminded to take care of, this one vessel that we occupy.
I absolutely love it.
I appreciate the time.
I
This is
do.
great.
So, I think there's times that just kind of stick out. This has really been a lot of fun, and we'll probably be tugging at you a little bit to get you on again, because for everybody watching this plugged in, there's so much of your story that we didn't cover. We could probably do
And let's learn from
10 hours of right, and just learn from it and the experiences and the things that you're focusing on. But man, we just had such a good time, talking to you.
Me too.
For all the ultra running family, thank you for your time, for supporting us. Go check out the book, Running Man. Go check out Charlie's website. Let us know if you have any questions. Maybe we'll talk them into doing a live Q&A or something at some point.
Yeah. Hey man,
fun.
anytime. And I'll do live Q&A. I'll go out for a run and just, as I think you both talked to me while I've been running, not only in person, but also on the phone. It's what I like to do. And for sure, like after, maybe after Badwater in a few months, we can come back on and see if I survived all this nonsense.
That would be fantastic.
You're going to do great, man. You're going to do great.
I hope so.
Or at least you're going to suffer well.
Yeah, I will. That's all I can do. And I'll suffer publicly. I always say I don't, the only thing we all have in common is struggle, and anybody else who's not putting out some struggle isn't serving the masses honestly, because we all relate to that. And we want to see our friends and and I want to see my competitors be, I want to see them get through things and suffer and get to the end. And it's inspiring to me too. And you guys' stories are inspiring. I'm sorry, I'm going off. We all, and I like to remind, this is a great place to end. I'm lucky enough to have people who treat me as a mentor, whether they tell me that or whether it's just from afar. Maybe I will get a message from someone. I got a couple emails today that were beautiful. And but I have those people too out there in the world. And I may not tell them. It might just be people I don't even know, but I watch how they conduct themselves and how they live their lives. And I find inspiration in that, because we are all a mentor to someone, and we all have a mentor that we're watching. If you have the chance, you should actually tell the one that you're watching, just because it is important for them to hear that. And it's a good reminder for me. But, it's, I think it's a good reminder. We all do the same thing, and we all struggle the same ways, and we just got to keep moving forward, man.
Well, that goes in, kind of the way we've been signing off, and the big message that we kind of promote is just show up. Sometimes you can't always control the outcome, but I think you've been just a glaring example of what it's like when you just continue to show up. So,
I appreciate that.
Charlie, thanks again. And we will be talking soon. We're excited for everything you got going on. And
all right, gentlemen.
Cut.
Hey, boys.
What is going on, Charlie?
You know what? I just figured it just came in the mail like an hour ago. So I figured it was appropriate to put it on. All right, I'm talking too much. Keep going.
No.
Listen, I'm taking notes.
That's actually what I was doing. I was taking notes. So is that still sound?
No, that's great. I'd love to. I mean, actually, the thing I'm rock and roll.
I'm real excited.
Damn tag on it, killing me. I spend the whole time we're talking worrying about that tag.
I'm gonna wear my Badwater Cape Fear hat, but I figured since you've actually ran the 135, it would be like a fallacy of me to wear something like that here.
Who does anything at 5:30 in the morning? Like I didn't even.
You'll just get
I need to go to bed now.
Right.
Don't be nervous.
Oh God, no.
I would have been nervous I hadn't already met you. But since I met you, and I know you're like you're normal like us. It's cool, man.
I hate that race, but I'll do it again. I would do it again. It's a painful event, man.
Yeah. Charlie, I can edit the first 3 times that I blow it. It'll be all right.
You don't want to spend the rest of your life answering the question, Oh, did you do the one in July? Well, you know, who puts tags in shirts anymore? I might have to give Chris a hard time. I'm not sure normal like us is a compliment, but thank you.
I think it's a great compliment.
Yeah.